The morning mist clung to the forest floor like ghostly fingers as Marcus Chen stepped carefully through the undergrowth, his specimen containers clinking softly in his pack. 3 months alone on Verdania had taught him to appreciate the planet's subtle rhythms, the way the bioluminescent fungi pulsed in harmony with his heartbeat, how the crystal leaf trees chimed in the wind like distant bells. As a xenobotanist, he'd studied dozens of worlds, but Verdania felt different. It felt alive in ways that made his scientific mind struggle to find rational explanations. His research station sat nestled in a valley 12 kilometers from his current position, where he'd been documenting the remarkable symbiotic relationships between Verdania's flora and the trace minerals in its soil. The work was solitary but fulfilling, each discovery adding another piece to the puzzle of how life adapted to thrive in the galaxy's most unlikely places. Today's expedition had taken him to the edge of the Crimson Ridge, where he hoped to find specimens of the rare ember moss that supposedly grew only in areas with high electromagnetic activity. The sound hit him like a physical blow, a thunderous crack that sent flocks of prismatic butterflies exploding from the canopy above. Marcus dropped to one knee instinctively, his heart hammering as the echo rolled across the valley. That wasn't thunder. Living on the frontier had taught him to distinguish between natural phenomena and something far more dangerous. This had been metal meeting stone at tremendous velocity. Rising slowly, Marcus oriented himself toward the sound source. Smoke was beginning to curl above the tree line about 2 kilometers north, a thin gray column against the amber sky. Every instinct told him to return to his station and report the incident to the colonial authority. But curiosity had always been his weakness, the driving force that had led him to choose a life studying alien worlds rather than staying safely on Earth. The crash site was worse than he'd imagined. A sleek vessel, maybe 30 meters long, had carved a devastating furrow through the forest before coming to rest against a cluster of granite boulders. The ship's hull was unlike anything in the colonial databases, smooth as polished obsidian, but with an organic quality that seemed to shift in the light. Strange symbols glowed faintly along its flanks, pulsing in a rhythm that reminded Marcus of a dying heartbeat. Heat waves shimmered from the wreckage, and the air tasted of ozone and something else, something metallic and sharp that made his sinuses burn. Marcus approached cautiously, noting how the vegetation around the impact site had withered, the crystal leaves turning black and brittle. Whatever powered this ship, it wasn't compatible with Verdania's ecosystem. A section of the hull had been torn open like crumpled paper, revealing glimpses of the interior. Marcus pulled his portable scanner from his pack, checking for radiation or toxic gases. The readings were elevated, but not immediately dangerous. Through the breach, he could see what appeared to be a control chamber, filled with instruments that defied easy categorization. Everything was sized for someone considerably larger than a human. Then he heard a low sound that might have been a groan of stressed metal, except it was too organic, too deliberate. Something inside the ship was alive. Marcus hesitated at the threshold, every survival protocol screaming at him to retreat. First contact situations required teams of specialists, diplomatic protocols, military backup. He was just a botanist with an emergency beacon and basic medical training. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and Marcus found himself thinking of the wounded animals he'd helped as a child. On his grandfather's farm, pain was universal, wasn't it? The ship's interior was a maze of unfamiliar technology, much of it sparked and smoking from the crash. Marcus followed the groaning sounds deeper into the vessel, using his scanner's light to navigate. He found her in what appeared to be a sleeping chamber, though the furniture was clearly designed for a very different anatomy than his own. She was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, nearly 2.5 meters tall, even lying down, with a powerful frame that spoke of both grace and deadly capability. Her skin had a subtle scaled pattern that shifted from deep emerald to golden bronze, depending on the angle of the light. But it was her face that stopped Marcus in his tracks. Undeniably intelligent, with large eyes the color of liquid amber and features that were alien, yet somehow achingly beautiful. A crystalline shard the size of Marcus's forearm protruded from her left side, just below what he assumed were her ribs. Dark blood, nearly black, and the scanner's light had pooled beneath her. She was dying, and from the look of the wound, she didn't have long. Her eyes snapped open as he approached, those amber orbs focusing on him with an intensity that made him freeze. She said something in a language that sounded like wind chimes caught in a storm, musical but urgent. Her hand moved toward what might have been a weapon at her belt, but the effort sent a spasm of pain across her features, and she fell back. With a sound that definitely wasn't mechanical. Marcus held up both hands, showing he was unarmed. "Easy," he said softly, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping his tone would convey peaceful intent. "I'm here to help." She watched him with the focused attention of a predator. Even in her weakened state, Marcus could see the calculation in her gaze, weighing whether he represented a threat or an opportunity. The crystalline shard pulsed with its own internal light, and he realized it wasn't just a piece of debris, it was some kind of technology, possibly a weapon, fragment that had lodged in her body during the crash, moving very slowly. Marcus opened his pack and withdrew his emergency medical kit. It was designed for human physiology, but the basics of trauma care were probably universal. Stop the bleeding, prevent infection, stabilize the patient. The alien woman's breathing was becoming more labored, and her skin was taking on a grayish pallor that couldn't be healthy for any species. She spoke again, more urgently this time, and Marcus caught something that might have been a warning, but when he looked into her eyes, he saw something that transcended species barriers: a fierce will to live, combined with a resignation that suggested she'd accepted her fate. It was an expression he'd seen on his grandfather's face in those final days, a mixture of defiance and grace that had haunted him ever since. "I can't understand you," Marcus said, settling beside her with his medical supplies. "But I think you're trying to tell me this is dangerous, that helping you might get me killed." He met her gaze steadily. "You're probably right, but I can't just walk away." Her expression shifted, confusion mixing with something that might have been respect. Marcus positioned himself beside the crystalline shard, noting how it seemed to have partially fused with her flesh. Removing it would be incredibly risky. He could trigger massive bleeding or damage vital organs, but leaving it in place meant certain death as the foreign technology poisoned her system. Taking a deep breath, Marcus placed one hand on the crystal shard and the other on her shoulder, trying to communicate his intentions. She understood immediately, her powerful hands gripping the edges of the sleeping platform. Her eyes never left his face as he began to work, and Marcus found himself drawing strength from that unwavering gaze. The shard came free with a sound like breaking glass, followed by a rush of that dark blood. Marcus immediately pressed emergency coagulant patches over the wound, fighting to stay calm as her body convulsed. For a terrifying moment, he thought he'd killed her. Then her breathing steadied, and the flow of blood began to slow. She reached up with one scaled hand and touched his face, her fingers surprisingly gentle. When she spoke this time, her voice was softer, almost wondering. Marcus didn't need a translator to understand her meaning. She was thanking him, but also asking a question that would change both their lives forever. "Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" As he worked to stabilize her condition, Marcus found himself wondering the same thing, but looking into those remarkable amber eyes, he knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. Whatever consequences followed, whatever dangers lay ahead, this moment of connection across the vast divide of species and culture felt like the most important thing he'd ever done. The alien woman's hand remained on his cheek as consciousness faded from her eyes, her last expression one of trust that Marcus knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. Marcus had never realized how loud silence could be, until he found himself sharing his research station with an alien warrior who might kill him. The moment she regained her strength, 3 days had passed since he'd carried her unconscious form from the wreckage, and Zara's he'd learned to call her from the word she repeated when pointing to herself, had yet to speak a word that wasn't either a growl of pain or what sounded suspiciously like threats. The station's medical bay had never been designed for anything more serious than treating cuts and burns, but Marcus had done his best to adapt it for his unexpected patient. Zara lay on the reinforced examination table he'd hastily modified, her powerful form dwarfing the human-scaled equipment. The crystalline shards removal had left a wound that would have killed a human, but her species' physiology was proving remarkably resilient. The emergency surgical foam had sealed the injury, and her natural healing was already beginning to knit the damaged tissue together. What fascinated Marcus from a scientific perspective and terrified him from a survival standpoint was how perfectly designed she seemed for lethality, even unconscious and wounded. Zara radiated a dangerous grace. Her scaled skin shifted color subtly with her breathing, and he'd noticed that her hands ended in retractable claws that had left gouges in the table's metal surface during moments of restless sleep. When she did wake, those amber eyes tracked his every movement with the patience of a born hunter. "Good morning," Marcus said softly as he entered the medical bay on the fourth day, carrying a tray of various foods he'd prepared in hopes of finding something her system could process. Zara was already awake, sitting upright despite her injuries, her gaze fixed on the station's main viewport that showed the forest beyond. She turned at his voice, and Marcus caught something different in her expression, less hostility, more curiosity. He set the tray on a nearby counter and pointed to himself. "Marcus," then he gestured to her. "Zara." She nodded slowly, then said something in her musical language while touching her chest, the translator device he'd cobbled together from his botanical analysis equipment chimed, processing the unfamiliar phonemes. After a moment, a mechanical voice spoke. "Zara, Veltereth of the hunting winds progress." Marcus smiled and tried pointing to various items on the food tray. Watching her reactions, she wrinkled her nose, a surprisingly human expression at most of his offerings, but showed interest in the raw protein samples he'd included. When he offered her a piece of the local fish he'd caught that morning, she accepted it with surprising delicacy, her claws carefully avoiding his fingers. "Where is my ship?" The translator crackled as she spoke again. "Destroyed," Marcus replied, then gestured toward the forest. "Crashed. You were hurt badly." Zara's expression darkened, and she said something that made the translator emit a series of warning beeps before producing. "Betrayer, honor thief, Keth will pay in blood." The venom in her voice made Marcus step back instinctively. Whatever had happened to her ship, it hadn't been an accident. Someone named Keth had tried to kill her, and from the look in her eyes, she intended to return the favor. Over the following days, their communication slowly improved as the translator learned to parse her language. Zara proved to be remarkably intelligent, quickly grasping the basics of human speech while teaching Marcus key phrases. In what he learned was called Kirathi. The story that emerged painted a picture of betrayal that made Marcus's blood boil. Zara had been betrothed to Keth, a warrior of high standing in her clan. Their marriage would have united to powerful hunting groups, but Keth had grown to resent Zara's superior skills and the respect she commanded among their people. The accident that destroyed her ship had occurred during a ritual hunt when Keth had sabotaged her vessel's navigation system and fired a crystalline spear that had pierced the hull. "He wanted me to die with honor," Zara explained, her claws extending unconsciously as she spoke. "Better a tragic loss than a wife who outshone him. Your people have a word. Coward." "Yes," Marcus said quietly, "we do." What surprised him was how the anger in her voice softened when she looked at him. "You risked your life for a stranger. This is not cowardice." Their conversations grew longer and more personal as her strength returned. Marcus found himself fascinated by her descriptions of Kirathi society, a complex culture built around concepts of honor, strength, and the sacred nature of the hunt. In return, he shared stories of Earth, of human curiosity, and the drive to explore and understand the universe around them. "Your people sound weak," Zara said one evening as they sat in the station's common area, though her tone had lost its earlier edge. "You scatter across the stars looking for knowledge instead of claiming territory." "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but that's how I ended up here, to save your life." She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the dim light. "Why did you save me, Marcus of Earth? You knew I was dangerous." It was a question he'd been asking himself for days, because it was the right thing to do. He said finally, Because you were in pain, and I had the power to help. Zara tilted her head. A gesture he'd learned indicated deep thought. Kirathi do not help wounded enemies. We grant them honorable death, or we leave them for the scavengers. Then maybe humans and Kirathi see honor differently. Perhaps. She moved closer on the couch they shared, and Marcus became acutely aware of her alien beauty, the way her scales caught the light, the graceful power in her movements, the intelligence that burned in those remarkable eyes. Among my people, a life debt creates a bond stronger than blood. You saved me, Marcus. My life belongs to you until the debt is repaid. The weight of her words settled over him like a warm blanket. I don't want to own your life, Zara. Then what do you want? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Marcus's heart race. He found himself studying the elegant lines of her face, the way her breathing made the scales along her throat shimmer. When had he stopped seeing her as an alien and started seeing her as simply beautiful? I want you to be free, he said softly. I want you to be safe. Zara's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something deeper and more complex. She reached out with one scaled hand and touched his face, her claws carefully sheathed. You are not what I expected, human. Neither are you, Marcus replied, leaning into her touch. The moment was shattered by the sharp chime of the station's proximity sensors. Marcus sprang to his feet, checking the displays as Zara moved to the viewport with fluid grace despite her recent injuries. In the distance, lights were moving through the forest, multiple sources, coordinated and purposeful. Keth, Zara snarled, her claws extending. He has found me. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice as he counted the approaching signals, at least a dozen contacts, moving with military precision through the darkness. How did they track you here? Kirathi are hunters, Zara said grimly. We follow any trail to its end. She turned to him, and in her eyes he saw both regret and something that might have been affection. You must run, Marcus. Keth will kill you simply because you helped me. I'm not leaving you. You cannot fight them. They are warriors, and you're wounded, Marcus interrupted. We leave together or we don't leave at all. For a moment, Zara stared at him as if seeing something she'd never encountered before. Then a slow smile crossed her alien features, revealing teeth that were definitely designed for more than eating vegetables. Very well. My lifesaver, she said, moving toward the weapons locker where Marcus kept his emergency equipment. Then we hunt. Together. As the lights drew closer and the sound of alien voices began to echo through the forest, Marcus felt a strange calm settle over him. He'd saved Zara's life on impulse, driven by compassion and basic decency. Now he was about to risk everything to keep her safe, and the realization should have terrified him instead. Watching Zara check the charge on his emergency rifle with professional efficiency, Marcus found himself thinking that he'd never felt more alive. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The emergency beacon felt heavy in Marcus's pack as he followed Zara through the darkened forest, every shadow seeming to hide potential threats. They'd abandoned his research station an hour ago, slipping out through the rear service hatch while Keth's hunting party approached from the front. The Kirathi voices had grown closer in the darkness, their alien words carrying undertones of anticipation that made Marcus's skin crawl. They enjoy this, Zara murmured as they paused behind a cluster of crystal trees, their luminescent branches providing sparse cover. For Keth, this is not just about silencing me. It is about proving his superiority through the hunt. Marcus adjusted his pack and checked his portable scanner for the 20th time. The device was showing multiple contacts spreading through the forest in a classic search pattern, but the readings were inconsistent. Kirathi biology seemed to interfere with his equipment in subtle ways. How many? He whispered. 12, maybe 15, Zara replied, her amber eyes reflecting the bioluminescent moss around them. All warriors of the Crimson Claw hunting pack. Keth would not trust this to anyone less skilled. The odds were overwhelming, but Marcus had spent 3 months studying Verdania's ecosystem, and he was beginning to see possibilities his analytical mind could exploit. Do they know this planet's wildlife? They know how to kill, Zara said grimly. That is enough for most prey, not for all prey. Marcus pulled up his botanical database on his tablet. scrolling through entries he'd made over the past months. "I've been cataloging this ecosystem since I arrived. There are plants here that could help us." Zara's expression shifted from resigned fatalism to genuine interest. "You would use the forest itself as a weapon?" "Nature's been playing survival games a lot longer than any of us," Marcus replied, highlighting several entries. "The question is whether you trust me enough to try something that's never been done before." Her hand found his in the darkness, scaled fingers intertwining with human ones. "I trusted you to save my life. I can trust you to help me live it." They moved deeper into the forest, Marcus guiding them toward a section where his surveys had identified several particularly dangerous plant species. The thornwhip grove was a natural maze where serpentine vines hung from the canopy. Like living cables, their surfaces covered in neurotoxic barbs. Most herbivores gave the area wide berth, and Marcus was counting on the hunting party's unfamiliarity with local hazards. "The thorns caused temporary paralysis," he explained as they skirted the grove's edge. "Not fatal, but it'll drop someone for 6 to 8 hours if we can funnel them through here." "You think like a hunter," Zara said with what sounded like approval. "But Keth is not stupid. He will send scouts first," as if summoned by her words. Alien voices echoed through the trees behind them. The hunting party had found their trail, and they were closing the distance faster than Marcus had hoped. Kirathi were clearly as formidable on foot as they were in every other aspect he'd witnessed. Zara pointed to a narrow passage between two massive tree trunks. "They will have to come through single file." Marcus pulled a small device from his pack, a pollen dispersal unit he'd been using to study plant reproduction. Working quickly, he collected samples from several of the toxic thornwhip flowers, loading them into the device's chamber. When they're halfway through the passage, this should create a cloud concentrated enough to put them down. They waited in tense silence as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Marcus found his attention divided between watching for their hunters and stealing glances at Zara crouched beside him. Even in their desperate situation, he couldn't help but admire the deadly grace with which she moved, the way her scales shifted, color to match their surroundings. She was a living work of art designed for survival, and the fact that she was trusting him with her life felt both humbling and terrifying. The first Kirathi scout appeared at the grove's entrance, a lithe figure, moving with predatory caution. Like Zara, the alien's scales provided natural camouflage, but Marcus had learned to spot the telltale shimmer of their movement. The scout examined the narrow passage, clearly recognizing it as a potential ambush point. "Keth has trained them well," Zara murmured. "He will not simply charge through." She was right. Instead of entering the passage, the scout began climbing one of the trees, intending to get above the potential trap. Marcus cursed silently. His plan had assumed they'd take the obvious route. Zara's hand touched his shoulder. "Adapt," she whispered. "Good hunters always adapt." Marcus looked up at the climbing scout, then at his pollen dispersal device. The unit had been designed for ground-level deployment. "But can you hit that branch?" He pointed to a heavy limb directly above the passage. Zara's claws extended, and she hefted a piece of crystalline rock she'd picked up earlier. Her throw was perfect, striking the branch with enough force to send it crashing down. The scout leaped clear, but the falling debris triggered several thornwhip vines, their toxic barbs releasing clouds of defensive pollen. "Now," Marcus said, activating his device. The combined pollen clouds created a toxic fog that filled the entire grove entrance. The scout, caught in mid-leap, crashed to the ground and lay still. Shouts of alarm echoed from the hunting party, followed by angry voices arguing in Kirathi. "You have bought us time," Zara said with satisfaction. "But Keth will be furious. He will become more dangerous." As if to confirm her words, a new voice boomed through the forest deeper than the others, filled with authority and barely controlled rage. Marcus didn't need a translator to understand the emotional content. Keth was not pleased with his warriors' performance. They retreated deeper into the forest, Marcus leading them toward another site he'd marked during his surveys. The Whispering Canyon was a geological formation where acoustic effects could play havoc with hearing, and the local wildlife included several species that used sonic attacks for hunting. "You are full of surprises," Zara commented as they descended into the canyon. Most humans I have encountered in the databases were simpler. We're a diverse species, Marcus replied, then paused. Wait, you've studied humans? Kirathi study all potential prey, she said matter-of-factly, then seemed to catch the implication of her words. Not that you are not prey, Marcus, just checking. He smiled despite their situation. Though I'm curious what those databases said about us. That humans are weak individually but dangerous in groups. That you use technology to overcome physical limitations. That you form emotional bonds that can override rational thinking. She glanced at him. The last part was listed as a weakness, was it? Zara was quiet for a moment. I am beginning to think your databases may be incomplete. They set up their next trap in a section of the canyon where the walls created a natural echo chamber. Marcus had discovered that the local crystalline formations could be made to resonate at specific frequencies if struck correctly, and some of those frequencies were very unpleasant. To Kirathi hearing, working together, they rigged a series of tripwires connected to small charges that would strike the crystal formations when triggered. The resulting sonic assault wouldn't cause permanent damage, but it would be disorienting enough to buy them precious minutes. You fight without fighting, Zara observed as they completed their preparations. It is elegant. My grandfather used to say that the best victory is the one where nobody has to die, Marcus replied. A wise human, though Keth would call him weak. What would you call him? Zara considered this carefully. I would call him someone worth learning from. The hunting party's approach was heralded by the sound of displaced stones and frustrated curses. They were being more cautious now, but Marcus could hear the growing anger in their voices. Keth was driving them hard, and their patience was wearing thin when the sonic trap triggered. The canyon filled with a harmonic shriek that made Marcus's teeth ache. Even from their protected position, the Kirathi hunters scattered in pain and confusion, their sensitive hearing overwhelmed by the crystalline resonance. But as they retreated to their next position, Marcus caught sight of a familiar figure standing at the canyon's rim, larger than the other hunters, his scales marked with distinctive patterns that spoke of rank and authority. Keth had found a way around their trap, and he was looking directly at them with eyes that burned with murderous intent. He sees us, Marcus warned. Zara followed his gaze and snarled. Yes, the hunt becomes personal now, as if to punctuate her words. Keth's voice echoed through the canyon, not the commanding roar of earlier, but something worse. He was laughing, a sound full of cruel anticipation that made Marcus's blood run cold. The real hunt was about to begin. Dawn broke over the shattered peaks with the color of old blood, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain where Marcus and Zara had taken refuge. They'd been running for 18 hours, using every trick Marcus could devise to stay ahead of Keth's relentless pursuit. But even with the advantages his knowledge of Verdania provided, they were fighting a losing battle against opponents who had evolved for exactly this kind of hunt. Zara crouched at the edge of their hideout, a shallow cave hidden behind a curtain of crystalline vegetation, her amber eyes scanning the approaches below. Her injuries had slowed their pace, and Marcus could see the pain she was fighting to conceal. The emergency medical foam was holding, but she needed proper treatment and rest, neither of which seemed likely in their current situation. They have stopped, she reported quietly. Keth grows impatient with this game. Marcus joined her at the cave mouth, using his binoculars to survey the hunting party's position. The Kirathi warriors had formed a loose perimeter around the base of the peaks, but they'd ceased their methodical advance. Instead, they seemed to be setting up a more permanent camp. He's trying to force us to come to him, Marcus realized. Make us desperate enough to try something stupid. It is a sound strategy, Zara admitted. We cannot remain here indefinitely. Your people will expect you to report in eventually. Marcus had been trying not to think about that. His scheduled check-in with the colonial authority was still 3 days away, but when he failed to respond, they'd send an investigation team. The last thing he wanted was to drag innocent researchers into this mess. There's another option, he said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. We could try to reach my emergency beacon. It's only about 5 kilometers from here, hidden in the old mining survey cache. Zara's expression was skeptical. Keth will have scouts watching all approaches to any human installations. It would be suicide. Not if we give him what he really wants. Which is, Marcus met her gaze steadily. A formal challenge. Single combat. Isn't that how Kirathi settle questions of honor? Zara's scales rippled through several colors Marcus had learned to associate with strong emotion. You cannot fight. Keth, he would kill you in seconds. Not me, Marcus said quietly. You. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of implications. Finally, Zara shook her head. I am still injured, weakened, and even at full strength. Keth is a formidable warrior. He would not have attempted this betrayal if he was not confident of victory. Then we make sure the fight isn't fair. Marcus pulled out his tablet and began scrolling through his botanical database, looking for specific entries he'd flagged during his surveys. There are plants on this world that could give you an edge, natural stimulants, performance enhancers, even mild toxins that could affect his reflexes if applied correctly. You would have me cheat. I'd have you survive. Marcus looked up from his screen. Keth tried to murder you with sabotage and treachery. I don't think he gets to claim moral high ground about fighting fair. Zara considered this, and Marcus could see her warrior's pride warring with practical necessity. Among my people, to use such aids would be seen as cowardice. Marcus finished, like using tracking devices in a ritual hunt. That hit home. Zara's claws extended briefly, then retracted. You make a compelling argument. They spent the next hour planning their approach. Marcus's knowledge of local chemistry would provide subtle advantages. A nerve agent, derived from the spotted bellflower that would slow Keth's reaction time. If introduced through a scratch, a mild stimulant from the mountain sage that would enhance Zara's endurance. Even a light hallucinogen that could affect depth perception if deployed at the right moment. The challenge must be issued properly, Zara explained as they prepared to leave their hideout. There are rituals, protocols. If I violate them, any victory would be meaningless. Then we do it by the book, Marcus agreed. But the book doesn't say anything about what happens before the fight officially begins. They made their way down from the peaks using a route Marcus had scouted earlier, one that would bring them within shouting distance of Keth's position, while providing multiple escape routes if things went wrong. The Kirathi hunting party spotted them immediately, but instead of attacking, they formed a loose circle as Zara stepped into the open. Her voice rang across the rocky ground as she issued the formal challenge in her own language. The translator, on Marcus's belt, providing a running commentary of the ritual phrases. Keth emerged from his warrior's ranks, like a living nightmare, easily half a meter taller than Zara, his scales marked with scars that spoke of countless battles won. When he smiled, Marcus counted too many teeth, all of them designed for tearing flesh. Keth's response was equally formal, accepting the challenge and setting the terms. Single combat to the death, with the traditional weapons of their people, curved blades that looked like they'd been forged from the same crystalline material as the shard that had nearly killed Zara. The fight would begin at sunset, giving both combatants time to prepare according to custom. As the Kirathi warriors dispersed to set up the ritual circle, Marcus found himself alone with Zara for what might be the last time. She was methodically checking her weapons and armor gear she'd salvaged from her crashed ship during their original escape. Are you afraid? He asked quietly, terrified. She admitted without hesitation. Keth is everything a Kirathi warrior should be: strong, fast, experienced. I have advantages in speed and flexibility, but he has reach and power, and you have me. She looked up from her preparations, and Marcus saw something in her expression that made his heart skip. Yes, I have you. She moved closer, her scaled hand touching his face with infinite gentleness. Whatever happens in that circle, know that you have given me something I never expected to find. What's that? A reason to live beyond mere survival. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. Zara, do not speak, she said softly. Your people have a custom, do they not? A gesture shared between those who care for each other. Marcus understood. He cupped her alien face in his hands and kissed her, feeling the surprising warmth of her lips, the way her scales seemed to soften under his touch. When they separated, her eyes were glowing with an inner fire that had nothing to do with anger. When, he whispered, come back to me. The formal combat began as Verdania's sun touched the horizon, painting the rocky arena in shades of gold and Crimson, Marcus watched from the edge of the ritual circle as Zara and Keth circled each other, their crystalline blades catching the dying light. Every instinct screamed at him to intervene, but this was Kirathi justice, and he had to trust in their preparations. Keth struck first, his massive blade whizzing through the air. Where Zara's head had been an instant before, she flowed around, his attacks like water, her smaller size allowing her to stay inside his reach where his strength advantage was minimized. But Marcus could see the toll her injuries were taking. Her movements were just slightly slower than they should have been, her breathing coming harder than normal. The tide began to turn when Keth landed a glancing blow that opened a cut along Zara's shoulder. It wasn't serious, but the sight of her blood seemed to energize him while sapping her confidence. Marcus watched in growing horror as the larger warrior pressed his advantage, driving Zara back toward the circle's edge. That's when their preparations paid off. As Keth closed for what looked like a killing blow, Zara's blade scraped across his arm, leaving what appeared to be a minor scratch. The nerve toxin Marcus had applied to her weapon began working immediately, not enough to paralyze, but sufficient to slow Keth's reflexes by crucial milliseconds. The fight's momentum shifted. Zara began landing hits of her own, her blade work becoming more aggressive as the stimulants Marcus had provided enhanced her endurance. Keth's confusion was evident as his body betrayed him, his usually perfect timing thrown off by the subtle chemical sabotage. The end came suddenly. Keth, frustrated by his inexplicable clumsiness, overextended himself in a massive overhead strike. Zara sidestepped with liquid grace and drove her blade up under his guard, the crystalline edge finding the gap in his natural armor. He dropped to his knees, dark blood pooling in the sand, his eyes wide with shock and what might have been respect. How he gasped in his native tongue. Zara knelt beside her defeated opponent, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "I learned from a wise teacher," she said, "that true strength comes from more than just claws and teeth." Keth's gaze found Marcus at the circle's edge, and understanding dawned in his dying eyes. The soft, "One taught you to think like prey." It might have been an insult, but there was grudging admiration in his tone. "No," Zara corrected gently. "He taught me to think like something better than either predator or prey. He taught me to think like a partner." As the Kirathi warriors began the ritual acknowledgement of their new leader, Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. They'd won, but more than that, they'd proven something important about the power of cooperation over conquest. Zara rose from beside Keth's body and walked to where Marcus waited, her amber eyes finding his across the ritual circle. When she smiled, he saw their future written in that expression, not as hunter and prey, not as alien and human, but as two souls who had found something worth fighting. The ceremony took place under Verdania's twin moons, their silver light casting everything in an otherworldly glow that seemed appropriate for such an unprecedented event. Marcus stood beside Zara at the center of a great circle formed by hundreds of Kirathi warriors, their scales shimmering in the moonlight like living armor. 3 years had passed since their first meeting in the crashed ship, and the nervous botanist who had pulled a crystal shard from an alien warrior's side was gone, replaced by someone harder, more confident, shaped by love and necessity into something new. Zara wore the ceremonial robes of a Kirathi clan leader, their deep crimson fabric adorned with crystalline ornaments that chimed softly as she moved. But it was the smaller figure beside her that drew the crowd's attention, their daughter, Nira, whose unique heritage was visible in her scaled skin that shifted from human pink to Kirathi gold depending on her mood, and eyes that held the best of both species. "The joining of species is unprecedented," rumbled Elder Voss, the ancient Kirathi whose scarred hide spoke of countless battles survived. "But unprecedented does not mean forbidden. Zara Veltereth has proven her strength as a leader, her mate has proven his wisdom as a counselor. Their offspring proves that the future holds possibilities we have not yet imagined." Marcus felt Zara's hand find his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Round them, the assembled warriors began the rhythmic chanting that would formally acknowledge their union before the entire clan. It was a far cry from any human wedding ceremony, but then again, Nothing about their relationship had followed conventional patterns. The past 3 years had transformed them both. Marcus had learned to fight when necessary, to think tactically, to read the subtle signs of Kirithi politics and navigate the complex web of honor and obligation that governed their society. In return, he had introduced concepts that were slowly revolutionizing how the clan approached problems: scientific methodology, technological adaptation, and perhaps most importantly, the idea that strength could come from understanding rather than domination. Zara had grown too, evolving from a warrior focused solely on personal honor to a leader capable of seeing beyond the next hunt. Under her guidance, the clan had begun trading with human settlements, sharing knowledge and resources in ways that benefited both species. It hadn't been easy. There were still traditionalists who viewed any cooperation with soft skins as weakness, but the prosperity that followed such exchanges was hard to argue with. "Daddy, why is everyone staring at us?" Nira whispered in the hybrid language she'd developed, mixing Kirithi syntax with human vocabulary in ways that made both her parents smile. "Because we're special, little hunter," Marcus replied, lifting her to his shoulder where she could see over the crowd. "Because we represent something new, something better," Zara added, her hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew. This pregnancy had been easier than the first, their bodies having learned to accommodate the genetic complexities of their hybrid offspring. The medical team from the Colonial Authority, now permanent residents of the expanded research station, had been fascinated by the process, though they were careful to maintain the respectful distance that Kirithi culture demanded. The ceremony reached its climax as Zara and Marcus exchanged the traditional vows, their words carrying across the assembled crowd in both languages. Marcus had insisted on learning the formal Kirithi phrases, and his accent drew approving rumbles from the warriors. When Zara repeated her vows in carefully practiced English, the human observers at the ceremony's edge wiped away tears. "In the sight of the hunting moons and before our gathered clan," Elder Voss declared, "I proclaim this joining complete. Let any who would challenge this bond face the consequences." The feast that followed lasted until dawn, with hunters returning from the night's work to add fresh meat to the communal fires. Marcus found himself moving easily between groups of Kirithi and humans, his unique position as clan consort allowing him to serve as translator and mediator when needed. It was a role he'd grown into gradually, learning to balance respect for tradition with the need for progress. "You have done well," Elder Voss told him during a quiet moment, the ancient warrior's scarred face showing something that might have been affection. "When Zara first brought you before the clan, many doubted your worth. A soft skin without claws or fangs, relying on tools and tricks rather than honest strength. And now," Marcus asked, "now they have seen that there are many kinds of strength," Voss replied. "Your mind has solved problems that no amount of fighting could resolve. Your knowledge has brought prosperity. Your courage has been proven in trials that would break lesser beings." It was true. The challenges had kept coming over the years: territorial disputes with neighboring clans, resource shortages, even a brief conflict with Kirithi traditionalists who had refused to accept Zara's leadership. Each crisis had tested their partnership in different ways, forcing them to adapt and grow together. The most difficult had been the plague that struck their food stores 2 years ago, a fungal blight that threatened to devastate the clan's winter supplies. Marcus's botanical expertise had identified the cause and developed a treatment, but implementing it had required convincing a council of skeptical elders that trusting human science was worth the risk. Zara's political skills and Marcus's patient explanations had eventually won the day, and the successful treatment had cemented his position as a valued advisor. "Papa, tell me the story again," Nira demanded as the celebration began to wind down, her young voice cutting through the adult conversations around them. "Which story, little one?" Marcus asked, though he already knew the answer. "The story of how you and Mama met. The one with the arrow and the paw," Zara laughed, her purr rumbling through Marcus's chest where she leaned against him. "It was not an arrow, little hunter. It was a crystal shard, and it was not a paw. Your mother is not some simple beast, but it's a better story with an arrow and a paw." Nira protested with the unassailable logic of a 3-year-old. She has a point, Marcus conceded, earning a mock-threatening growl from his mate. Very well. Once upon a time, in a forest far away, a brave human pulled an arrow from an alien's paw. As he told the familiar story, Marcus felt a profound sense of contentment settle over him. The tale had become part of clan mythology now, told around campfires and embellished with each retelling. In some versions, he faced down a dozen Kirathi warriors single-handedly. In others, Zara fought Keth while mortally wounded. The details changed, but the core remained the same, the story of two unlikely souls who had found each other across the vast divide of species and culture, and they lived happily ever after. Nira prompted as the story reached its traditional conclusion. They lived, Marcus corrected gently, looking into his daughter's unique eyes. They loved. They built something new together, and they made sure their children would have a world where happiness was possible. Later, as they settled into their private chambers in the clan compound, Zara moved restlessly around their dwelling. The traditional Kirathi architecture had been modified to accommodate human needs with proper lighting and climate control, but the essential character remained a warrior's lair adapted for a family. Worried about something, Marcus asked, recognizing the signs of her agitation. The human delegation arrives tomorrow, she said, pausing by the window that looked out over the expanding settlement. Representatives from Earth itself, not just the colonial authority. They want to study our arrangement. Marcus understood her concern. Their success had attracted attention from the highest levels of human government, with some seeing their hybrid family as a model for future human-alien relations. Others viewed it as a dangerous precedent that could complicate humanity's expansion into inhabited systems. Whatever they decide, he said, moving to stand behind her,